Hello, welcome to this episode of Lasting Transformation with me, Alun Parry, the author of How to Remove Trauma Response, the Memory Reconsolidation Guidebook for Therapists and Coaches. And what I want to look at today is how our own ecosystem of how we run our practice actually contributes to client results. Now, there's an assumption, isn't there, that we often think about how do we do better for our clients, and we think of it solely in terms of our knowledge, in terms of our training, in terms of our mastery, in terms of our knowledge of memory consolidation, and that's all really important. But I want to look at some more overlooked things that really contribute in terms of our potency and our ability to really do transformational work, because, as you'll find out in this episode, a big chunk of it absolutely is about working on the right things, working on those things that are actually going to trigger memory consolidation within the session. But actually, two of the things that I'm going to talk about today is actually about us and how we show up in the session and how we can ensure that we set ourselves up to be really fully present and alert and potent in the sessions ourselves. And those two things are really important because they could actually stop us being transformational, even if we are masters of memory consolidation itself. And so I'm going to look at three things that have made me a better practitioner. And within the Coaching Academy, these are things that I tell the members of the Coaching Academy as well, of how to become a really potent transformational practitioner, whether you're a therapist or a coach. And the three things I want to look at is, first of all, the mastery of knowing the important things that we need to be doing in sessions in order to get to transformation. That's the first. It's our kind of knowledge and our mastery of the right things rather than just stuff that doesn't move the needle at all. The second is noticing where we have our own emotional learnings that the work will be pressing and dealing with those. And then finally, I want to look at the ecosystem of our own practice. And when we get to that, and by practice here, I'm not talking about how we do the work. I'm talking about practice with a capital P, the way we set the work up for ourselves. And that's a really important part of it. So let's go to the first thing. A really important part of becoming a transformational practitioner, and by transformational, I mean someone who is able to create the kind of change that does not depend on homework or having to do this task or that activity for the rest of your life, but actually, once the transformation has happened, it becomes effortless after that. That doesn't mean you don't have to roll your sleeves up and do some hard work to get to that transformation. But as a client, once the transformation has happened, then there should be no more effort. It's not one of those things where, you have to keep having a bath every day in order to make sure that you don't stink. A lot of therapy is like that. You have to keep on doing the work. A transformational therapist and a transformational coach means that once the transformation happens, there is no work to do because there's nothing to keep at bay. The old learning, the old trauma response, however you think of it, has been fully updated. Now, there is only one known brain mechanism that is capable of doing that, and that's memory reconsolidation, which is the very reason why I focus on that. I teach how to do memory reconsolidation, how to trigger that transformational brain mechanism with your clients. And I do that because it's the one known brain mechanism that is capable of transformational change. And so why would we do anything else if we're dealing with emotional learning, as we tend to be? Now, before I learned that, I would have good sessions, but I was kind of a hit and miss maestro. I'd have some great sessions, but I couldn't always say why. And I was trying to pin it on various modalities. But that didn't make sense ultimately, because I'd be using the same modality with the client that I wasn't getting the results with. And that was really, really frustrating. And I see this a lot in the people that I talk to, either people who join the academy or people who contact me as a result of these podcasts and the other content that I throw out there, that people really resonate with that sense that I had of being a hit and miss maestro. And it's frustrating because we get great results and then we don't with the exact same thing. So what's going on there? Since I found out about memory reconsolidation, and since I went down that rabbit hole with a real commitment to mastering memory reconsolidation, what happened is that I stopped becoming hit and miss anymore. And what happened is that I then got consistent, reliable transformation client after client. And the unexpected but lovely side effect of it is it didn't just make my work more effective, it actually made it more fun, more enjoyable. And I've seen this from so many practitioners who've entered the coaching academy, that what they say is it isn't just that they're getting the results, it's that they're enjoying their work, that the dread that they sometimes felt about going into a session in a state of not knowing what to do has now been removed, because they have this wonderful roadmap and they can go in with a real expectation, because they're getting consistent transformations reliably, and because they fully understand why they're happening, they're able to make it happen over and over again. And the old guesswork was exhausting, but the new certainty is fun. And it's satisfying to sit there and really feel centered and grounded, because you know what it is at any stage you need to do to move the case towards memory reconsolidation. And then the moment that it happens, it's almost like magic. And of course, it's not magic. It's just how our brains work. But it feels like magic in the room. And they're really, really satisfying as well. And so that was the first thing that helped me transform into a transformational practitioner, into someone who gets consistent client results, into someone who has that feeling of mastery when I'm in sessions. And it was going down the rabbit hole of memory reconsolidation in the way that the coaching academy focuses on. Because once I had that, everything became more fun. And once I had that, everything became repeatedly transformational. So I was no longer in this state of hit and miss. And so that's the first thing that I would recommend people to do, is to really make the decision, make the commitment to master memory reconsolidation. I see therapists in particular, but other kind of practitioners too, that when we're stuck in this work, we go and learn whole modalities that just end up adding to the ones that we had and confusing us, when really what we need to master is the one key mechanism that the brain has, and there is only one that we know about, that actually triggers transformational change. It's called memory reconsolidation. And so it's so freeing and liberating that instead of having this hodgepodge of different coaching modalities, we just have the ease and simplicity of just focusing on the one thing that really, really matters. Now, the second thing I want to talk about that helped to transform me into a transformational therapist and coach is also related to memory reconsolidation, but in a slightly different way. So the first point I made was about how I learned and mastered memory reconsolidation, how I decided and committed to go on that journey to learn this really revolutionary, transformational stuff from a really revolutionary breakthrough in neuroscience. But this second point isn't about me learning about memory reconsolidation or applying it with my clients. It's actually much more personal. It's about actually being on the receiving end of it. What I noticed when I was working with my clients is I would see them getting these transformations as a result of the work that we were doing, as a result of my learning and mastery and dedication to this topic. And I'd think, well, I'm a human too, I have stuff. I'd like a bit of this myself. Now, this is particularly interesting as a practitioner because you'll know this and you'll recognize what I'm about to say, because when we're doing the work, there is an inevitability that there are things that our clients bring, or there are ways that they show up, which kind of press some of our own psychological buttons too. So what I noticed was when I took those, like my own personal stuff that would inevitably be leaking into the work, that I didn't realize that was just going to be an unexpected side effect, that when I sorted some of my own emotional learnings and some of my own responses, that it would have this happy, unexpected side effect that even though I was aiming at something more personal, it was actually affecting in a really positive way how I was showing up as a practitioner as well. But also, those things that you notice, and I'll give you an example from me in just a second, but those things you notice where the work itself presses your own buttons, that is a cue for you to go, do you know what? That's an emotional learning. I don't need to keep that. If I can reconsolidate that, either by myself or with support from, say, a practitioner like me or somebody else who uses memory reconsolidation well, then what you'll be able to do is get rid of that emotional learning, and it simply won't show up in that way going forward. So there are all sorts of things that show up with practitioners that the work will touch. It'll be, I kind of feel silly doing this type of work, or I feel as though I can't assert myself in a session and put a suggestion to a client to see if they would like that way of working, or I can't be visible, or I'm having difficulty charging my worth because that touches a button. Whole host of things. And I might not have said any of the ones that relate to you, but I'll share the one that relates to me. Whenever a client was in a position where they wanted the change to happen yesterday, it would really press on a button with me where I then particularly wanted to hurry up. Now, the problem with my desire to hurry up is it also put a pressure on me to get a result at that very session. With those kind of clients, I was becoming a single session therapist, even if I needed longer, even if the work needed longer. And so what would happen is that I would put all that pressure on me, and I would actually be less effective as a therapist. And here's why in this particular case. A big part of memory reconsolidation work is that we're essentially trying to find the internal opposition of the client. Because the client says, I don't want this problem. I want that wonderful life instead that I'd be having without this problem. But it's hard for them to change because when they seek to change, there's some internal opposition which I think of as like a part. I call it the invisible twin inside the coaching academy. And we talk an awful lot about that. Our last live therapy demo was about the invisible twin. But this invisible twin wants to keep the problem alive. This invisible twin is wanting to ensure that the client doesn't get the change that they're here for. And so a big part of the change process is actually to find out, well, what does the invisible twin do in order to create the problem? And more crucially, why is it so necessary? What is the worldview? Now, all that part of the work is called discovery. We can't know it in advance. And we can't, like some therapies presume to do, but I think they're incorrect. We can't just assign, oh, if you've got this particular problem, then this is what's going on for you. Two people with the same problem will have a very, very different reason for having that problem. It's constructed. We take a constructivist point of view inside of the coaching academy. But if you're doing discovery work, how can you do discovery work well if, like I was with some clients, I then put myself into a mad rush? Think of any time where you've lost something. Like, let's say you're walking down the street and you realize, oh, I've dropped my keys along this route. You wouldn't sprint back and forth in the hope of seeing it. You go quite slowly because you kind of need to go a little bit slower when it comes to discovery work. Because if you rush, you miss things. And if you miss things, you don't get the keys. You don't get the fundamental understanding of the worldview of the invisible twin so that it can be updated through memory reconsolidation. So what I was actually finding with those kind of clients is that they were basically saying, come on, Al, hurry up. They weren't saying it in those words, but by basically letting it be clear, like, my distress is such, I need this gone yesterday. That then had me respond, not from the kind of place of calm that was needed, not in the slowness that I needed. And I don't mean artificially slow. I just mean moving at the right pace rather than the fast pace, in order to really get to the emotional learning that was keeping their distress alive so we could reconsolidate it. Instead, I rushed myself. And there was a whole host of emotional learnings beneath that. But now, because that stuff has been reconsolidated for me, now I show up much more potently, even with those kind of clients that need me to hurry up. I'm no longer entering a session thinking, I need to get this done in this one session. I now have a more sensible and practical and realistic and powerful metric of what makes a good session. Because a good session isn't just one that ends in reconsolidation, but one which, a good session could be one where you've really understood together the fundamental basis of the invisible twins worldview, because once you know that, you can then create the mismatches necessary to update it. And yet without knowing that, you're stuck. And so hopefully you can see, just in my case, by reconsolidating those emotional learnings in me, I now show up as a very different, much better practitioner, because I can be present in the room. I can do the work at the pace that it needs to be rather than hurrying myself up. And so by transforming myself through memory reconsolidation, I'm now a much better practitioner. And I'm pretty certain that lots of you who are listening to this will be able to notice, as you reflect on it, that there are things that happen in session or around your work that essentially are pressing on buttons for you that is actually making you less powerful and potent and capable, even if you know memory reconsolidation, even if you had all the skills, because your own invisible twin is now saying, well, I know you need to go slow for discovery, but I'm going to hurry you up here. I'm going to try and make you kind of rush to the finish line and see if we can get some sort of outcome. The invisible twin was getting in the way of my therapy practicing. And now that it's reconsolidated, I'm a much better practitioner as a result. So there's two things there we've covered about how to become a transformational practitioner. One was about learning memory reconsolidation, mastering it, applying it with your clients, which of course is what the Coaching Academy is designed to do. But the second one is about noticing how the work presses your own hot buttons and then working with those hot buttons to update the emotional learning behind them so they're not hot buttons anymore. Both about memory reconsolidation, but the second one was actually about looking after ourselves, not in the sense of self-care or something woolly, but in the sense of updating the emotional learnings that inevitably will show up in our work. Now, the final thing that I want to talk about is what your practice looks like. And I don't mean your practice as in what your modalities and approaches are. I mean your work in life. Practice with a capital P. Like, how many clients do you see? How often do you take breaks? How many hours a day are you working? How are the hours actually set up? What are your fees? Do you take sabbaticals? All of these kind of questions are the ecosystem of how our practice is set up, because if we get that to a place where it's unsustainable, well, guess what? We start actually designing a practice that is built to burn us out. And then it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how skilled you are at memory reconsolidation. If you're showing up just completely burnt out and drained, how present are you really going to be? How potent are you going to be? So the question of what does your own sustainable practice look like? What is the ecosystem you've actually built? Is that actually going to get you to a place where you are in your sweet spot for being a really optimal practitioner, an optimal coach, an optimal therapist? Now, I always think that if you're working on emotional learning, but you're not aiming at memory reconsolidation, we're automatically in a suboptimal place. But we don't often look at the other side of it, which says you could be working in a memory reconsolidation way, but you might have just set up your own work in practice ecosystem in such a way that it takes you away from being an optimal therapist despite that. It takes you away from being an optimal practitioner because you've basically built something to burn you out, that it's not sustainable, that even though you've got the other stuff in place, the mastery, the knowledge, the stuff that actually does take away the dread of a session because, I don't know what to do here. The dread of a session could actually show up because you've overtired yourself and you created something that is an ecosystem that is simply not sustainable. And it's important because it's your skill set and it's you that is in the room facilitating this for your client. And so when we get our ecosystem wrong, even with all the knowledge and mastery in the world, we can still actually fall short for our clients simply because we're being so hard and unsustainable ourselves in the way that we work. Now, I've noticed this myself. I take fewer clients now than I used to. And you might think, well, that benefits me, and it does. But I tell you who it really benefits even more than me. It's my clients. By having fewer clients, what I've noticed, and it's a lovely thing, is I'm now giving themselves a concierge level access to my brain. And what I mean by that is when I had loads and loads and loads of clients, I had loads and loads of people in my headspace. But now I've brought the number to my sweet spot. And now I'll be going out for a walk and I'll think of something. I'll think about one of my clients. Now, we're not in session, so technically they're not paying for that. But what's happening is that they're now getting a concierge level access to my brain, because my brain is able to think of them and chew things over in that natural way that brains do, simply because it's not crowded and crammed. I'm able to go on a walk. I'll go to the park, which is near me, and I'll have a walk, and I won't be intending to think about anything. And then suddenly I'll get a little epiphany and I'll think, oh yeah, I remember them saying that. That joins to this. And I'll have an idea that might just bring the work forward. And I'll bring that to the client, and very often it'll be something that's really important. Now, when I was just crammed with lots and lots of people, I was still giving them my all in the session, but they were not getting a concierge level service from my brain, because when the session was over, I just had to move on to the next person. And now, even though it might look like what I've done is to take care of me, it actually gives a much, much, much better service for my clients, because I'm aiming for my sweet spot. Now, number of clients is just one example of creating a sweet spot to make you an optimal practitioner in your work. But there are lots and lots of other ways. And in this monthly mission within the Coaching Academy, we actually do something strange, which is we put the memory reconsolidation to one side, and everyone is going through their own practice ecosystem. How is your work set up? What is it that it would look like if it was set up for your sweet spot? And what needs to happen to get there? Now, every month, as well as the coaching, as well as the live calls, as well as the live therapy demos, as well as the self-paced bite-sized curriculum, we have these lovely little monthly missions. And they're a great way just to revisit something, or dip our toe into something new, or explain something from a different angle, or have maybe a kind of light bulb moment that I've had that I can then teach to my people. But they're all based on, you can then just go and apply that, and they last for the month, they expire so things don't get bloated, and we're on to the next one. And they're normally about the work. They're normally about the approaches, the techniques, the way to do memory reconsolidation. But this month, because of what I'm saying here is so important, it's actually the focus of our monthly mission. Because if you have an ecosystem that is set up to burn you out, to keep your brain busy, to make sure that you're not having enough of a rest, and I call it, it's going to damage the service you give to your clients. I call it an ecosystem because what I notice is as you change one thing, it actually has an impact on something else. Like if you charge really low fees, for instance, you're going to have to work a ton of hours. And so it's all set up in that way that it really truly is a system. And as you change one thing, it has an impact on the other. So there are 3 things that will make you an optimal practitioner. 1 is work on the right thing. If you're working with emotional learnings, as you pretty much always will be, work in a way that masters memory reconsolidation. Commit to becoming someone who has mastery over memory reconsolidation work, because that is the optimal way to work. Secondly, notice your own emotional learnings and have them reconsolidated either by yourself, if you can do that, or find a practitioner who specializes in memory reconsolidation like I do. And you will notice that those personal things will bleed through lovely into your practice and the work that you do as a practitioner. But notice as well those things where the work is touching things and reconsolidate them. You will show up so much more potently and presently, and the work that you do, the mastery that you've committed to, you'll be present in order to implement that in a far more effective way. Just like I had the mastery, but the hurry up stuff was getting in the way of our discovery work together until that was reconsolidated, and now it doesn't. But the third thing, which, like I say, is the subject of our monthly mission for this month, is to really have a reflection on your ecosystem of how you work, who you work with, how often you work, what your fees are, all those kind of things. That is going to have a massive difference, because the burned out master of memory reconsolidation is not in an optimal place to do the work well compared to the version of you that's really sharp and refreshed and alert. So I hope this has been a useful thing to think of, because you'll notice that 2 out of the 3 things there were about taking care of your own stuff, whether it be your emotional learning or whether it be your work practice ecosystem. Now, if you'd like to be part of the Memory Reconsolidation Elite Coaching Academy, if you're a therapist or a coach, or you're training to be either, then it's designed for you. And like I say, this month in particular, our monthly mission actually goes deep on the thing that I spoke about third, that ecosystem. But of course, when you're in there, you'll also be doing the first thing, which is mastering the way to work in order to trigger memory reconsolidation. And so by going through the self-paced curriculum, by getting the coaching, by either attending or watching the live sessions or the live therapy demos, you'll be building that mastery. But this month in particular, you'll have this particular monthly mission. So if it's something on your radar, it's a really great time to join us, because you'll be able to reflect on your own practice ecosystem to make sure that you're not building something that is going to be inadvertently designed to basically wring you out and burn you out. The best practitioners are those who know memory reconsolidation, who have had it applied to themselves so they can be very present in the sessions, but also are refreshed and alert. And like I said before, the benefit for the clients is they get a master practitioner who knows what the brain needs in order to trigger transformational change. They get someone who has gone through that for themselves, and so is able to be fully present in the session, and so do that work without any diversions from their own invisible twins. But on that ecosystem thing, your clients, like mine do now, get a concierge level access to your brain, because you're going to be working with enough reflection time and enough refreshment and enough breaks and all the other stuff that you need to find that sweet spot. That's what we're looking at this particular month inside of the Academy. So if you'd like to join us, you can go to freshtherapists.com/coaching. That's Fresh Therapists plural. freshtherapists.com/coaching. And if you'd like to work with me one-to-one, whether you're a therapist or coach or not, and you're thinking, well, I'd like some of that memory reconsolidation for me. It might be that you're not a therapist and you just want it for your own personal life. It might be that you are a practitioner and want it in your personal life. And it might be that you're a practitioner and you're like, I notice this in my work. I need some reconsolidation for that. Then you can work with me directly one-to-one, and that's at alunparry.com. Now, the Alun is spelled slightly unusually because it's got a Welsh origin. So Alun is spelled A-L-U-N. instead of the more typical way. So that's alunparry.com. Either way, I hope this has been useful for you to reflect on, and I will see you on the next episode.